Davi. Today we are talking about Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Crooked Kingdom is the second and last in the Six of Crows duology. So first up was this beauty, which if you have not gotten your hands on this book, I have no idea where you have been for the past year. This book is basically a young adult Ocean's 11. It's about 6 people that go on a heist mission, and these characters are brilliant. They are 9 steps ahead of everybody else. They think so fast. This book is phenomenal. It was one of my top 2 go-to recommendations for people in 2015. I do have a Fandom Feels video for this book where I talked about it with Natasha and Kate, so click on the book to check that out. If you have not read this one yet, go read it and then come back, okay? But today, I'm talking about Crooked Kingdom, the second book. And this is the red one. See, the pages are red, those pages are black. Both really cool. Wait, let's see what it looks like naked. Ah! Look, it's so red. It looks like a big red box. I almost want to put it on my shelf like this, but I actually don't. I don't know. So the actual pages are white still, but the outside is red, and that makes it look cool. Anyway, in this one, the gang is still together, and they need to get back at people for cheating them and basically being awful people. A lot happens in this book. Unfortunately, I waited a little bit too long before doing this review, and I didn't take good enough notes, so I've actually read another book and a half since this one. So if I don't remember as much as I should, I'm sorry. I'm basically just going to go through the main characters and talk a little bit about what happened to them. Before I get into spoilers, I'm just going to say I definitely liked it. I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to. I still gave it 5 stars. I still thought it was worth 5 stars. But I think it's because the first one was so amazing that my expectations for this one were absolutely through the roof. And it only skimmed the roof, which is still absolutely wonderful, but just not quite what I was expecting, and I'll get more into that in the spoiler section. So if you have not read this yet, go read it and then come back and talk to me, okay? Okay, bye! Like I said, in this, I'm just going to go through the characters and say a little bit about what was happening with them and what I thought about it. Let's start with Wylan, because the book kind of starts with Wylan. So in this one, Wylan starts out still looking like kawaii, and that causes some issues for him, not only because he has this thing with Jesper that has gotten really confusing because he doesn't look like himself, but also he's having a little bit of an identity crisis, I think. He was at a place in the first one where he was just starting to realize who he was and feel comfortable in his own skin. So the fact that he's not in his own skin now creates a little bit of an issue. I loved his character in this one. I became such a Wylan Jasper shipper, which I liked them in the first one. I was seeing it and I was liking it, but I was more into other couples in that book. I think it was because it was just starting and at its little flirty phase, but wasn't a full-blown ship-worthy thing yet. In this one, it was no doubt my favorite couple in this book. I was obsessed with them, which I guess I'm talking about Jesper in this too, though I have more to say about Jesper than I do Wylan in this one. I think most of Wylan's story was in the first one, and this one had a lot more of Jesper's story. I loved Wylan in this, but we already knew most of his story. We knew he couldn't read. It was interesting to hear about the fact that, he did try and he's almost given up and realized, I'm never going to read, and that's okay. There are other wonderful things I can do. So I don't know how I feel about that, because obviously as somebody that loves reading pretty much more than anything else in the world, I can't understand how somebody could just decide that they're never going to learn how to read. But at the same time, I was really proud of the fact that he realized that even though he did have this major thing that he had seen as a flaw his entire life, he was definitely still worth something, and he had something to give to the world. That was beautiful. And then Jesper, who, I mean, I loved Jesper in the first one. I love his personality. I love his sense of humor. I don't love that he has a weakness for gambling, but all of these characters are beautifully flawed, and that is his major flaw. I loved that we got more backstory for him. We got to meet his father, who I was expecting to be some evil person, mostly because all of the other fathers in this, well, all of the other father figures in this are scumbags. But his father was fantastic. Sure, he might have been a little bit disappointed in him when he first found out, like, everything was lies and whatever, but he didn't let that get him down. He was helping them, he was supporting them, he was doing everything he could. He liked all of Jesper's friends, and those are not lovable people. They're lovable people in the book, but they're not people I would want to be friends with in real life. So the fact that his father was willing to just jump in and help when it meant lying and cheating and doing all of these awful things was just magical. He is a wonderful father, and I was so glad that I got to see that. I got to see them worry about each other, something that we haven't seen much in actual, like, blood relative way. And I loved where they ended up in the end. They got to a very beautiful place where Jesper is going to be helping Wylan with his situation, reading anything that needs to be read to him, working together, and just being together. And then Wylan is also there for Jesper in the ways that he needs. For example, he's like giving him access to a little bit of money, but only a little bit at a time, so that Jesper can learn to control it and not lose it all gambling like he has in the past. Since I'm talking about them at the end, I guess I'll go to Inej next, because at the end of the book, she is staying with them. Kaz and Inej was definitely my favorite couple in the first book. I was obsessed with them. It tortured me, and I loved it. And I enjoyed them in this one as well, but I think they were more frustrating for me than shipworthy. For one thing, like, you heard a lot about their feelings for each other, but you don't see it as much in this one. And I think a large part of that was the fact that they were both fighting their feelings. They had that one moment in the first one where Inej says, I want all of you or none of you, basically, in different words. It's, I want you without armor or not at all, something along those lines. And Kaz realized that he couldn't give that to her. They're kind of keeping their distance, yet not. There was the moment when Kaz is doing her bandages and he touches her. And you're like, look, you're touching her and you're surviving and you're not totally freaking out. And he even, like, kisses her neck slightly. And it's great. But then he ends up cowering in a corner, and yeah, Dobby didn't like that part either. It was not so good. I was a little disappointed with the way their storyline ended up. I would have liked a little bit more. I was telling this to Natasha when I was talking to her when she finished the book. Had there been a third book, I think they were in a great place, because Kaz realized he couldn't give Inej what she wanted right now. As much as he wanted to try, he just couldn't do it. So instead, he was backing away, he was letting her be, and he even took it upon himself to find her parents, who, hey look, another pair of wonderful parents that had been looking for her and just didn't know where to look. But I think that was a beautiful moment. I would have appreciated it a lot more, like I said, had there been a third book, and had we gotten to the point where they could at least, like, hold hands. Because it was left open. It wasn't left as, okay, they're just never going to be together, so let's move on. But it also wasn't left as they're going to be able to be together. And one thing I really liked was when he did have that breakdown, she had a moment of, like, it's hard for me too, because of the things that she had been through before she joined him. Like, it's hard for her to touch someone too, but she was willing with him, but he just couldn't. I know Leigh Bardugo said that she's, like, taking a break from this world, but I'm hoping that we do get something more with the two of them, because that ending just wasn't enough. I needed something. I needed to know one way or the other, were they going to be together? or were they not? And I know life doesn't necessarily work that way, but I wanted to know. It's a book, and I like my endings. While I'm talking about Kaz a little bit, I think Kaz is actually a big part of the reason I was slightly disappointed with this book. And I don't even want to say I was disappointed, because I did love it. It was enjoyable. It was worth reading. It was fantastic. It just wasn't quite up to my expectations, up to my ridiculously high expectations. And I think that was partly because for the first 3/4 of the book, really, the 6 of them weren't a step ahead like they were in the others. You thought they were, but then it turns out that the antagonists were actually a step ahead of them and knew what was happening. And I understand from a writer's perspective why that was done, because they needed to be brought down a peg. They needed to realize that they were kind of full of themselves, and life wasn't going to just work out the way you wanted it to. You're not always going to be able to think of a quick plan and make it happen immediately. But once they actually took a step back and said, wait a second, nothing we're doing is working, we need to seriously plan this out, then they did get to be 5 steps ahead again and go for it. So there was one section that was up to par with the actions of the first book, but the rest of it wasn't quite. And that's kind of where my issues were. It just didn't feel like as much fun as the first book, but it was a little bit darker, and I guess that's okay. There were so many spoilers from the Grisha trilogy in this book. There were a couple mentions in Six of Crows, but Crooked Kingdom was just full of them. I had recommended this duology to somebody that had not read the Grisha series yet, though I think she wanted to at some point, and as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, that was a spoiler. Oh, yeah, so was that. Oh, that was a major spoiler. So, as somebody that read the Grisha trilogy, I'm like, oh, that just gave everything away. But I don't know if there were things that people would pick up on if you hadn't read the Grisha trilogy. I don't know. If you haven't read it, let me know if there were things that you noticed that you think kind of ruins the possibility of ever reading the Grisha trilogy. If you are somebody that has read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom before the Grisha trilogy, but you've read the Grisha trilogy now, let me know if those things ruined it or if it was still fine, because I'm very curious about that. I don't think it ruined everything, but there were some things where you're like, oh, yeah, that was a major spoiler. Oh, yep, okay. Yeah, that's a spoiler too. But I'm curious about that. Back to Nina. I loved having her interact with the other Grisha from the Grisha trilogy. That was really fun. And then, okay, if you haven't read the Grisha trilogy, stop for a moment, because I'm going to get into something that was a spoiler in this, but I don't know if you picked up on the fact that it was a major spoiler, so just mute it for a second, and I will put a note at the bottom when you can listen again, okay? Yeah, okay. So I loved seeing Nikolai again. He's one of my favorite characters in the Grisha trilogy. Obviously, he was one of everybody's favorite characters in the Grisha trilogy. And I loved that he came back as the privateer. So I had a bit of a fangirl moment at the point where we see him as the privateer, and you're like, yeah, I like you. You're back. All right, cool. And then Kaz was interacting with him, and I'm like, he's the king. He's the freaking king. Yeah. And then he told him, but nobody else knew. And can you tell I'm fangirling a little bit? I love Nikolai. I wish we knew more about what his life was like now. Does he still talk to Alina? I want to know if he still talks to Alina. Because there were things in this that were okay, I remembered that everybody thinks Alina is dead. Alina and Mal are dead, but they're not. They're living off on their own, on an island or something, and I want to know if Nikolai, I think we knew at the end of the Grisha trilogy that Nikolai still saw her occasionally. I want to hear about that. I need a short story. Leigh Bardugo, if you are listening, I need a short story about Kaz and Inej, and I need a short story about Nikolai seeing Mal and Alina, okay? Okay, fangirl moment over. I'm putting my note at the bottom that you can listen again if you turned off the speakers for a second. back to Nina and Matthias. So they got to spend a little bit of time together being happy. She got to teach him how to have some fun, which was great. I will say, I think it was actually the perfect choice to kill him off, because so many needed to die. There were 6 of them, and they were putting their life in danger over and over and over again, and they were escaping death at the last second so many times. It was unrealistic for all 6 of these main characters to escape this alive. And the thing about Matthias is most of his personal character development happened in Six of Crows. He completely transformed in Six of Crows in a fantastic way, but his transformation was basically over. And yet, he was still struggling internally a little bit, not when it came to Nina, but when it came to other Grisha. He still had this internal struggle where it was his natural instinct to be disgusted by them and say this is unnatural, even though he knew and loved Nina, and they were her friends. Nina also, where she wanted to go and the things she wanted to do wouldn't work with Matthias. So I just couldn't see the 2 of them being together in the long run. I could see them like being together in terms of each other and like being happy together, but I couldn't see them like interacting in the world as a couple with the issues that they still both had, and I didn't think those were going away anytime soon, or even anytime in the semi-soon long term. I don't know. The one thing, I was so sad that it was the kid that killed him, because it was almost like a Sound of Music moment where he like almost convinced the kid that he'd been thinking incorrectly all these years and there was hope for him and he didn't have to do that, and then at the last second, boom, went too far and he shot him. And then he shows up and he just dies, and nobody even knows what happened to him, because he wasn't supposed to be in danger at that point. Like, the danger was over, and then this kid just shows up. The other thing is, I didn't cry when he died. I cried a tiny bit after the fact. I think I cried more when Jesper and Wylan were talking about the fact that they were supposed to all make it out of it than I cried when he actually died, or even Nina's reaction to him dying. I think another part of the thing I didn't really like is, because it was a duology, it had less of an ending than my trilogies usually do. So I wanted a little bit more closure, which is weird for me to say because I'm one that often likes a slightly open-ended ending. I don't like them to say, this is exactly what happened for the rest of eternity. So I like being able to create my own interpretation of what happens afterwards, but I like it to be clear what direction it's going in. And there were certain aspects of this where I still had no idea what direction it was going in. And I think that was one issue. But overall, I really did enjoy it. I gave it 5 stars. Clearly I liked it. I think it's just easier for me to talk about the issues I had than all of the things that I loved, because unfortunately those are the things I harp on. But I really did like it. 5 stars, but that's rounded up. I didn't like it quite as much as the first one. I think that's partly because, like I said, the first one absolutely blew me away and set my expectations for this one ridiculously high. But that's it. If you liked what I said, or if you didn't like what I said and just want to hear what I have to say about other things, click below to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at ReaderGonnaRead, just like my YouTube name. And I'm hoping to do another video very soon, because I've already read another book and a half since this one. But I will talk to you next time. Bye! I have an Ember in the Ashes bookmark in it. And then come back and talk to me, okay? Okay, bye! No, not you. You're not going anywhere.